The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hey everyone, my name is Jeremy Goldberg. I'm the president quarterback at LeagueApps, and it's my pleasure to welcome you to today's town hall, the NextUp town hall, focused on really managing your finances during this crisis for all kinds of youth sports, adult sports, local sports organizations. It's incredible the response we've gotten for today's discussion. We have over 600 organizations from around the country that are signed up to be part of this conversation. And this is going to be a conversation. We've got 5 incredible panelists with unique perspectives, as well as the opportunity to engage you through the questions that you're sharing that I'll address and they'll address as well. And I want to acknowledge as we start that at a time where we're emphasizing social distancing, at LeagueApps and what we're focusing on at NextUp is all about doubling down on togetherness, doubling down on community. Because while we're apart, there's a chance to be together. I had a pretty amazing experience this weekend going to a virtual dance party. I would never have thought of. I'm pretty old. I have 2 young kids. I don't even go out to clubs anymore. But I actually went to a club in my own home. There's a DJ by the name of DJ Nice, who you can follow him on Instagram at DNice. And he decided just to create something on homeschool, which was him DJing with his Instagram live up in his home. 200 people showed up the first night. By the time I found out about it, still on the right side of the cool curve, there was 20,000 people joined. By Saturday night, 100,000 people had joined this party. And it wasn't just me. You had Michelle Obama, you had Bruno Mars, you had Ellen DeGeneres, you had Quincy Jones. All these guys were jumping in on this dance party as people were coming together, listening to music, dancing in their homes, separate but together. And although we can't be in the same room together, I think the opportunity for us to come together as a community to respond to what's going on, to support each other, is really what NextUp is all about. I know how difficult of a time this is for each of you, because I know how challenging this is for us as an organization. If our revenues are almost completely out, that's happening to you all as well, and we're empathetic, we understand that. But I also believe, and I'm incredibly optimistic, that we're gonna get through this, and we're gonna get through this in really unique ways. And there's a few reasons why that's the case. The first is great organizations never waste a crisis. Great organizations are able to distinguish them at a time where they're being challenged. And we know so many of you organizations are represent that kind of greatness, and I already see that in the individual stories and ideas that you're having. Second, necessity is the mother of innovation, right? That's the quote. Necessity is the mother of innovation. So there's an opportunity for you all to think differently about your businesses. How can you use this time to improve? I know that's the question we're asking ourselves at LeagueApps, and I think there's an opportunity for us to take things to the next level. So when we return to normal, you'll have all kinds of other things at your toolkit. The third is I'm optimistic that youth sports is going to be one of the key ways that we bring this economy and this country back. First of all, as a parent with 2 young kids that might burst through the door at any point, I can't wait to find someone else and pay someone else to take my kids off their hands and get them active, right? Every parent I'm talking to is going through that same reaction, right? They want their kids to get back to normal. They want them outside. They want them playing with their friends. They want them in these kinds of organizations. And I also think that with schools being out, with the fact that you have summer camps may be canceled, there's a huge opportunity for the youth sport and local sports, adult sports sector to respond to the kind of activity and engagement that people are going to be looking for. And I think people appreciate what they're missing. It's like when I go on a trip, my wife appreciates me a lot more when I come back than she does every day that I'm living together with her. I also think, and Izzy's going to get into this, so will Paul, is that the government stimulus package that passed yesterday can have some very positive impacts on this world of youth and local sports. And we're going to get into that today and deliver more resources next week. And then last but not least, I talked about Muhammad Ali. I'm actually reading a great bio right now by Jonathan Aide, which was considered one ESPN Book of the Year last year. And reading about Muhammad Ali, I've embraced this idea of survive to thrive, right? That's what this is about, survive to thrive. But there's another quote that I read that I really loved about Muhammad Ali. If you even dream of beating me, you better wake up and apologize, right? If you even dream of beating me, you better wake up and apologize, right? The people on this call are too resilient. They're too important. They're too impactful for us to go away and, in fact, not get better through this. So I'm excited for us to support each other, and that's certainly what we're about. LeagueApps, as I shared last week, launched this NextUp platform in November of last year. We brought over 350 incredible organizers together from the youth side, the adult side, local side, to New York City for an incredible conversation, something that we'll repeat again this fall. But we decided to start to bring that community online, and that includes these town halls, that includes things that we're doing on LinkedIn and Slack, and includes the blog at LeagueApps.com, all kinds of ways to really make resources available for you. And today's discussion is a product of the questions that you're sharing with us. So we're eager to get into the discussion. We're eager to hear from you throughout this conversation, and we're eager to deliver more and more resources. And at the end of today's call, I'll explain all the things that we have planned for next week. Remember, as I shared last week, even a champion like Muhammad Ali gets knocked down. It's a question of how you get back up. There's a lot of resiliency in this group, and today, I think a lot of that conversation is about that kind of resiliency. So with that, I'm eager to jump in, and we've got some incredible panelists. We've got Jennifer Pivnick, who brings not only the unique perspective of helping run one of the top youth sports organizations in the country at Solar Soccer in Dallas, but also now being incredibly involved as the president of U.S. Sports Club Insurance, really understanding how the insurance product could actually be something that could be useful to the organizations as they navigate what they're dealing with. Sarah Natchez is the Chief Operating Officer of Super Soccer Stars, an incredible organization that's running soccer in lots of different locations that are really responding innovatively and thoughtfully to today's crisis. We've got Paul Mastrocola. Paul is an incredible employment lawyer and business litigation lawyer that can talk about the legal implications of how you might confront some of the decisions related to the finance and the management of your organizations. We've got Mitch Storch from Hoop Heaven. Mitch is also an incredible organization that's been recognized by the NBA as part of their flagship network. And Nick is a lawyer by background who's been navigating from the perspective of being a facility. And then last but not least, Izzy Klein. Izzy is a top lobbyist in Washington. He worked for Chuck Schumer, a top aide for many years. Chuck Schumer, being the Senate Minority Leader, was instrumental in the passage of the bill last night. And Izzy and I happened to go to Georgetown together. We were intramural wiffle ball champions from Georgetown. And I believe finalists for when it came to intramural flag football. So lots of sports credibility as well. I want to start with you, Sarah, and have you jump in. And first, just tell us a little bit about Super Soccer Stars. Is it a for-profit? Is it a nonprofit? What's the size, scale of your organization? And I really want you to start about how you responded to this crisis, how you've navigated the financial implications and the revenue hit that you probably have incurred.
Yeah, absolutely. It's great to be on the panel. I'm excited to share my perspective on some of the difficult decisions and the impact on our business model during really challenging times for everybody. Super Soccer Stars is the largest corporately run youth sports platform and organization in the nation. We run classes and programming for children of all ages from 1 all the way up to 18 with a large focus on our 1 to 8 age group. We also have a club called Soccer Stars United that has about 47 travel teams nationwide in New York, Miami, and LA. We're in 13 states, 25 different markets. We reach about 110,000 children every year. And we run seasonally. And for us as well, we have in normal operations, about 800 coaches at any given time. So when we're a service industry and the operations grind to a halt, that has definitely been a challenge for us. But I appreciate you starting with me, because I do want to start by saying I really think that this environment has actually definitively changed our business for the better. And I know that a lot of people listening are saying, how is that possible? And, I'm not trying to sugarcoat it and pretend that there isn't some real pain and difficult decisions happening right now. But without a doubt, this has forced us to think differently, and it has brought in initiatives that would have taken 2 to 3 years for us to get to the forefront. Yes, we've had to cut expenses and put that at the top of our list. We did have to make some really difficult decisions in terms of personnel and otherwise, but that has forced us to be more efficient. And as we move forward, that is really going to be what puts us at the forefront, particularly in terms of digital innovation. We have entirely changed our business model, and in under 10 days transformed to a digital suite of offerings to be able to move our business forward. And when we get through this, because everybody knows and we firmly believe that we will get through this, and by being gritty now, that we will then have diversified our business model and can come out the other end and be a leader across the board, and this will have improved our business.
So first, Sarah, I appreciate that message of innovation and optimism. Certainly that kind of idea of being a youth sports, a local sport entrepreneur, right? Super Soccer Stars embodies that. Talk to me about navigating some of those difficult financial decisions. How did you think about cost savings? How did you think about either layoffs or furloughs or part-time, full-time? Like, what are the options that an organization might have, and how did you kind of work through those options?
So we really went down nitty gritty, got out a spreadsheet with every single one of our employees, both on the part-time, full-time office staff, and then also on the coaching side. From the coaching side, we did consult as many resources as we had and made sure to have as many conversations with the community. I mean, that's why I think it's so important what LeagueApps is doing to bring the community together, because the more brains and sounding board there can be out there, the more collective good decisions there can be made across the board. We had to make some difficult decisions in terms of, from the coaching end, we knew that we had to tell our coaches to apply for unemployment to be able to get immediate relief from the government, at least initially. But what has driven our business model going forward is that our number one goal is to get these coaches back on the virtual field as quickly as possible. So then we had to go through our staff. And I think, at the end of the day, this forced us to make decisions that, if I'm being really honest, some of them we had put off a bit. We had outsourced our customer service to the Dominican Republic, and we were questioning that decision. We were going back and forth. And this really enabled us to say, no, we need to bring this back in. We need to have our staff reconnect to the customer and make sure people are wearing different hats, that it's diversifying the reach of each one of our employees and really getting back to our core group who are going to have a broader impact. So yeah, we had to lay off some people who we had been postponing the decisions. And then we looked at the staff who are directly connected to operations and had to really furlough some people entirely. Some people are on 50%. And then across the board, our entire organization held hands and everybody took a 25% pay cut.
Yeah, so you've just suggested a range of options, a pay cut across the board. Some people are being furloughed, which I believe means they continue to get benefits, but they're not being paid a salary, but they remain an employee. In some cases, you've let people go, which actually allows them to get unemployment with the idea that you could hire them back. And then in some cases, you've converted some people to part-time. So you used a range of those different tools, and we'll get into some of those things as Paul to kind of navigate that. And as you said, you came up with a new strategy, and then you use that new strategy kind of to navigate those things. A final question on expense management. We get this question. You're renting a lot of spaces presumably for your programs. Were you able to delay those payments? How do you manage some of the expenses as an organization as you're confronting the fact that you don't have revenue coming in, but you might have expense obligations outside of the people on your team?
Yeah, that's been a challenging one for sure. I will say that across the board, something that has always been at the forefront is developing positive relationships and really focusing on the business relationships that we have. So I feel like that's been crucial during this time when you're having really candid conversations, but it's with people who you have gotten to know and that we've been able to have those conversations. So we have had to, discuss the reality and be able to either postpone payments or really renegotiate and say, listen, this is a government mandated shutdown, and be able to get rent abatement or be able to be creative to lessen the immediate accounts payable impact that we have at the current time.
Yeah, I think it's really important. We've seen this. What are the conversations you have with those vendors, and what does that look like? And again, rent becomes one of those places where can you pull up your deposit? Are there other mechanisms? Can you go to 50% rent? What are the different things that you might be able to do? And some of the legislation that passed might impact that as well. So thank you, Sarah. I'm going to go to you, Mitch. And Mitch, I've always had a lot of respect for you as someone who's a leader within the youth basketball community, adult basketball as well, running a top facility in New Jersey. Certainly as a facility operating, you're directly impacted by not being able to leverage that facility. And you have a legal background as well. So talk to me about the way that you've approached kind of managing your business, managing the expenses, and the decisions you've kind of had to confront, the advice you might give for organizations that are out there that are similar to your position.
Sure, thanks. It's great to have me on with everyone, and hopefully I could at least give you my perspective on a lot what's going on. We own 3 facilities here in New Jersey. We actually rent them, so we have 3 different landlords. Some are small and some are large. And that's a different perspective in terms of an operator of this facility. So when we decided to close on March 11th, all 3 of our locations here in New Jersey, which is one of the harder hit areas of the country, we had to think about what we could do, because our seasons in basketball are just starting our spring season. So March 15th through June 15th is the spring. So we were at the point where some people had paid, some people had already practiced, but we were just starting up, and we went to zero revenue and zero activity. And at that point, as a business person with a little bit of a legal background, I haven't practiced in about 15 years. The first thing we had to do was figure out what are our expenses and what we could do to sort of alleviate some of them, and then hope for relief from local, state, and federal governments. So we first did is looked at our leases to determine if there was any way to get forbearance. We looked to see if there was a force majeure clause in a lease. So if you're a facility operator, you may have a clause in there that talks about government action or a war or something that sort of stops either party, the landlord or the tenant, from actually having any obligations during that weird part of time. Some of our leases had it, some don't, and some actually carved out, said, even if something like this happens and the government shuts you down, you still have to pay rent. So we looked at those and said to ourselves, well, let's start early and speak to our landlords, weeks in advance about what we could do. And as I said, bigger landlords were more amenable to, take some time. We understand. We want to see what the federal government's going to do. Smaller landlords that own properties that may be your landlord may have financial obligations that are more difficult for them to absorb by giving you relief. So that's something we're working on, and it's not as easy as, they're going to give you rent relief right away for a period of time. They may offer you partial rent relief, but that's still difficult when you have zero income coming in. Then we had to look at our staff. Because we're seasonal and we hadn't started yet, our main staff, we have 3 facilities, our managers and some other full-time people, we continue to pay. But people who were coaches, scorekeepers, referees, and there's another issue, is the issue between W-2 employees and having a lot of independent contractors, which sometimes are our coaches and all of our referees. They weren't going to get paid until we actually started playing games, or we started actually having team practices or entering tournaments. So a lot of them have no income coming from us, because normally at this point they wouldn't probably see any income until starting in April. How that's going to be affected by the federal relief plans that are out there, don't know. The next thing as an operator you could look at is if you have insurance. What we looked at right away was business interruption insurance. That's something that we had purchased from the beginning. We used it once when one of our facilities had a roof problem and we were closed for 4 months. We thought, hey, this is a perfect time for business interruption insurance. It covers your overhead. It gives you a profit. It would have been a perfect time to sort of protect us for the time we're closed. Lo and behold, it's pretty much not available to most businesses, because viruses are sometimes and oftentimes carved out. Pandemics are carved out. And more interestingly, is a lot of them provide that you have to have an actual physical damage, either to your facility or a nearby facility that keeps you closed. And in New Jersey, even more, about, back either during SARS or N1, one of the other viruses that are out there, they actually passed legislation that insurance policies that with business interruption would carve out for pandemics. So these are the kind of things we had to think about right away to sort of stay afloat, waiting to see if the federal government or the states, because there are states out there that are offering grants and more relief than maybe New Jersey is right now, but the federal relief bill that's now passed is the thing that everyone was sort of waiting for to see how that affects all of us.
Yeah, so I appreciate that. I think that's a great overview, Mitch. And I think, one of the things I'd emphasize is you're thinking methodically of, like, if you're full-time employees, you've got your W-2, your part-time employees, then you've got the question of your expense bases, and you're looking at the insurance things. And these are all the kind of questions you're working through. One of the things that I'd say is and we'll put the pressure on Izzy a little bit, because the support that's coming out of government at the federal level, maybe also the state and local level, it's designed to actually solve these issues when there's nothing structural about your business, but there's something that you couldn't have foreseen that you're trying to navigate. And one of the things I'll say is that it's not just about the assistance that exists today, it's about the ongoing advocacy for additional assistance, which I'll come back to. So I appreciate you sharing that perspective. Jennifer, I'm gonna go to you, and you bring this kind of hybrid perspective of inside the kind of room. You can relate to people that are running organizations. At the same time, you now have become an expert in the insurance market. And so one is how people's insurance might support them today, and also what could they be looking for, both from the perspective of as a business, what they might be doing, but as important, the kinds of insurance they might be offering to parents. Like if you had registration insurance, are you protected in a situation like this? Or are parents protected as well? So as you answer that question, I will remind everyone there's a chat panel to the right of the GoToWebinar. If you type in any question there, my team is filtering that up, and so we'll be using that to engage the rest of the team. So Jennifer, talk to us. How would you approach this insurance as a business from Mitch's perspective?
Well, for looking at insurance of what you have, you know, typically pandemics, epidemics are not covered for, you know, a variety of reasons, but it would devastate the insurance industry. And then that's when the federal government comes in and allows resources to kind of help offset that. For sports fee insurance, which is specifically what USSCI covers, that covers the cost of competitive sports. So it provides a refund policy for sports fees when there typically is not one. Because youth sports clubs, they run their budget usually season to season. They work hard to keep their prices as low as possible, and it does not allow for refunds. So with sports fee insurance, what it does is it gives parents the confidence to commit to a program knowing that they have options when their child is sick or hurt. It's really youth sports consumer protection that protects both the club and the parents. So moving forward, I mean, the best thing for clubs to do right now is understand that this option is out there, knowing that they work hard to keep their prices low, and then deciding if they want to include this as a benefit to their program, or if they just want to offer it to their parents for them to make the decision themselves.
But to be clear, the existing sports fee insurance policies that are out there, would that have covered, would that have continued the payments to the club if a parent didn't continue participating, or does it not? Does that exclude the pandemics?
Well, it depends on the reason for the child being removed from the program. So if the child was hurt or ill, like every claim is looked at individually. If it's because of a, you know, you've got to look at the reasons of what's covered. Typically what's covered is season-ending injury, season-ending illness, death of an athlete or parent, job loss, job relocation, mental illness, short-term injury, short-term illness. So if you look at the reason for the claim and why it's made, then that would determine the coverage. But because the sports fee canceled the program, that wouldn't be something that would be covered.
I got you. So to put a fine point on this, as if a parent elects for this option, some organizations might mandate it. I've heard of those situations. Some of our LeagueApps customers, others might encourage it. If that happens, then basically, if for some reason a parent gets laid off and they're unable to continue the coverage, the insurance would pick up those things. If somebody got sick within that family, that might be another reason that's the case. If the program isn't available, that may not be covered by it. So it has to be unique to the individual claimant that would have elected to buy that insurance. And I think this, and one of the things I appreciate your entrepreneurial spirit is I imagine you're continuing to look for ways, through U.S. Sport Club Insurance, about how do you respond to these kinds of circumstances and identity. So it's interesting to think about how insurance becomes, going back to Sarah's point about what are the ways you get better, maybe one of the additional mechanisms to protect yourself as an organization. Paul, I'm going to go to you and then save Izzy for the last spot, which is as organizations are navigating these kinds of questions, right? And they're in a situation where the revenue is dried up. They're contending with obligations they might have, like on rent and other areas. They're contending with parents that might want money back, so they're already not collecting new revenue, and they have to take the revenue they've already gotten and feel that question of paying it back. And they're questioning about, what do I do with my full-time staff? What do I do with my 800 part-time coaches? What are the options and that an organization might have to how to think through those things, recognizing that different states and areas might have slightly different rules?
Right. Thanks, Jeremy. So, we're seeing sort of, I would say, many common themes on the employment side, and every situation is different. Unfortunately, we're not getting questions now about staffing up and hiring, but I'm optimistic that as the economy recovers, we'll be getting those questions soon, and hopefully that'll be sooner rather than later. But some of the common themes and questions are cutting wages, reducing hours. What can we do? How can we do it? In general, companies, employers, nonprofits can reduce salaries of employees. What we're advising and need to be careful about is that any reductions be done consistently on an equitable basis across the board with a standard percentage. You don't want to get into a situation where there are different classes of employees that have different levels of cuts, or disparate impact or allegations of disparate impact among protected classes. You don't want to have these cuts impact women or disabled employees or particular ethnic backgrounds more than others. So that's something to be careful about. If we get a lot of questions too about whether full-time employees can go to part-time employees, which can be done, and also whether part-time employees can be converted to the independent contractors and be used on an as-needed basis. And what I would say is, again, laws on that vary state to state, but be very careful about reclassifying employees as contractors. Usually, independent contractors means that that person is totally free from direction and control of the employer. And if they are a former employee, now just acting on a sporadic or part-time basis, they'd most likely be classified as an employee, and there can be some serious sanctions and basis for litigation to misclassify. So you have to be very careful about that. There's also distinction between layoffs and furloughs that we're getting many questions about. And just to be clear, a layoff is really a complete employment termination for all purposes. A furlough, it's interesting, really, it doesn't have an accepted legal definition in most places, but what it really means generally is it's equivalent to a leave of absence without pay while the employees retain benefits. So there might be continuation of health insurance, and there might be a statement of some expectation that if circumstances change, the employees go back to active status. That is not mandatory. Okay, if employers furlough employees and the circumstances don't change or don't change soon enough, it can be converted to a full termination, and those benefits can be cut off as well. These are some of the issues with the.
Yeah, so if I navigate that, so the first thing I'd say is, if you're going to make decisions around layoffs, about converting people to part-time from full-time, if you're going to think about, for example, reclassification, as you mentioned, you got to make sure you're doing this right? You want to make sure you're getting the right kind of advice or perspective, only because the implications, I assume, of getting it wrong is that somebody might sue you, right? One of your employees, someone might who is in that situation, could choose to take action, or there's ways that the government might choose to take action. Is that a fair summary of the risk?
That's right. It can be by private action by the employees or former employees, or by government action, government enforcement action. What I would say, Jeremy, is I think many employers are, recognize that their employees aren't necessarily anxious to sue them. Everyone's trying to survive right now. There's some goodwill, aura of goodwill out there, but I would caution everyone, because there are plaintiffs' attorneys trolling for these cases, and some of these, slight missteps can end up in class action lawsuits or things that you don't want to have to deal with in this environment.
Yeah. So one is making sure, and again, we're going to continue to figure out how we support the community, making sure they do these things right. The last question I have before I go to Izzy is, so as an organization, you're thinking about what your options are. One is you might consider a layoff. And if you consider a layoff in that respect, I guess you could technically hire them back, but they're eligible to collect unemployment in the meantime. So a good example of this, I mentioned this last week, one of my favorite restaurateurs, an incredible entrepreneur, Danny Meyer, they made the decision to lay off over 2,000 employees in his company, believing that the best thing they could do is give them the opportunity to get unemployment, but the hope that they're going to hire them back. But that would be the best decision that they could make. The alternative to that is a furlough, which, why would you consider a furlough as a strategy versus consider a layoff? And then obviously then there's the question going to part-time, but why furlough versus a layoff? And how would an organization choose that? Why would an employee want one over the other?
Well, I mean, I think if furlough has the hook of enticing the employee or having the expectation that the employee will come back to active status in the not too distant future, and it can be more generous to the employee because employer-sponsored benefits continue. I would note that this is also state by state thing, but many states now are allowing collection of unemployment benefits in a furlough status. And that is sort of a trend that's happening in the last couple of weeks as state agencies, which really mostly administer the unemployment programs with federal backing, but the state agencies make mostly the rules. And they are loosening up the purse strings for employees. So they might be able to get unemployment.
Right. A good example in that too is in New York City, for example. I believe there's a program called a shared work program So if I understand it, if you reduce, they're not full time and you reduce the number of hours they have, the
Correct.
government will actually, you can get partial unemployment to make up that salary difference in addition to what you pay them as well. So there's
Correct.
like a blended model there that I think that might be available in specific states that people could look into.
Yeah, so work share programs are prevalent now in most states, absolutely.
Great. So lots of different options there, and we'll come back. I know there's a lot of questions coming in back for Paul. So Izzy, you're the knight on the shining armor, white knight, whatever it is, riding in. Government, this is an unnatural situation. People are running. We know people want to come back to play sports, adults, kids. People want to get them out of their house. We got to make it through this. This was unforeseen. Insurance may not cover it. What was this bill about? And what might be the provisions? First of all, is it going to pass? What might be the provisions that are relevant to this world of youth and local sports organizations that are really small businesses, some for-profit, some nonprofit?
Sure. Thanks, Jeremy. And look, I can't imagine what some of the folks on this call are going through today. I mean, I know it's a diverse group of individuals and organizations, nonprofits, for-profits, small freelancers, independent business people, and so there's a lot to take in here, and it's what Jeremy was referring to is the CARES Act, which passed the Senate last night by a vote of 96-0. This is the third installment of the COVID-19 bills that the Congress has considered. A huge portion of it is for small businesses. A huge portion of it is for individuals who are unemployed. And those are the two areas where I think we need to spend a minute or two. The first on unemployment insurance. If folks on this call or your employees have already been laid off, there's some assistance coming. Uninsurance or unemployment insurance pays out through the states, but the federal government is making a huge injection into that reservoir of funds. I know that state offices are overwhelmed. I don't have any idea how long individuals are going to have to wait to access some of this money if they are laid off. Some states are putting in a process to have folks whose last names start with A through F to call on Monday, from G to K or whatever to call on Tuesday and so on. And so I think there's just a lot of pent up desire to access those funds. The second bucket of money for individuals is for Americans who are under a certain income threshold. I think it's $75,000. I think the number that they ended up on was $75,000. Folks will be getting a check from the federal government for somewhere around $1,200, depending on what your income is. If you're a married couple, you get $2,400. There's some real direct assistance coming over the next 3 to 4 weeks. But the final bucket of money that I want to talk about for a second is what's going on in the small business world. As I said, I think most of you who are running organizations are probably 500 employees or less. You might be nonprofits. You might have a whole host of organizations that are in different states that you help to manage, but are considered kind of independent organizations, like a franchise or something like that. They wrote the bill that passed last night to be as inclusive as possible for individuals, for businesses who need access to liquidity. There are a couple of different levels of small business loans. I don't want to get too far in the weeds because I think that there's just so many permutations. If you already have a small business loan, which many of you might, there is some relief for forgiveness of those loans and a raising of that loan threshold. So keep that in mind if you're already in the system. Second, there are going to be small business emergency grants that you can access. If your business was a direct hit by the pandemic, and if you are just having liquidity problems, because everybody's having liquidity problems, there are some additional avenues of small business loans that you will have access to. So let me pause there for a second and see if you've got any more questions from the Chairman.
So Izzy, I think the one thing I'll put a fine point on is it seems like some of the loans that if let's say a lot of the organizations out there that are impacted, they can't collect revenue right now. Parents aren't spending money, it's shut down naturally. They've got employees that are for-profit or nonprofit. Am I right that some of the assistance is geared, if they've never had a loan before, to getting an assistance that's somehow tied to the payroll that they had? So basically, if they keep their payroll relative to what it was before, the government will give them a loan, and if they don't let anyone go or they maintain that payroll, the government will actually forgive the loan. Am I describing that correctly?
That's correct. So, and again, there are thousands of permutations of this, but the goal that the lawmakers have kind of put forward is to keep as many people employed as possible. And so if you've got a business where you're deciding, as Paul was talking about, oh, well, I need to furlough, I'm not going to make payroll, well, maybe people can take a salary cut for some period of time. You keep your head count solid, and then you go back to the government and for, whatever your head count is, they're kind of counting the maximum loan to be 2.5 times your last 6 to 8 weeks of payroll. So they're kind of projecting out, what would be 4 or 5, 6 weeks at least for what you might need and what you might need to pay back people.
Okay.
So I think they're trying to incent as many folks as possible to keep their payroll at the same level, maybe not at the exact same pay, but at the same level. And again, for some organizations, that ship has sailed. The hardest hit ones, they've already let go of employees.
Right.
They will have some other revenue streams to tap into. But at that point, you're kind of an unemployed individual who needs to tap into the unemployment insurance in your state.
Right. So there's if I had to step back and tell you the way I'm interpreting this, one of the things I'll say is that we're working on collecting and with Izzy's help and other kind of experts, helping to distill this down to ways that can be really relevant to organizations. We should have that content up on our website at the latest by early next week. It's a 900-page bill that I was working through last night with our team. A few important points to think about. If you're in a situation where you need to let people go, there's more generous unemployment insurance that'll be for them in a way that might allow you to build relationships with them and hire them back, right? And in fact, I think as Sarah will get into some of the virtual training, they've actually been able to bring some coaches back by virtue of some of the things that they're doing. The flip side is if you've not made those decisions, the government is actually trying to make it easier for you to not make those decisions and give you some options to get government assistance. And in this case, it's loans that themselves may be forgiven, which effectively would make it a grant subject to specific kinds of constraints. And what's very important, something that I know Izzy was really hopeful for, is that it's not just for-profit organizations, but also for nonprofit organizations will have the benefit of doing this. The last thing I'll say is, Izzy, is this the last stimulus package, or is there more to come?
No. So thanks for asking that leading question, Jeremy. Look, I think that folks see this as step 3 and probably what will be a 5 to 6 step process. We believe that there will be at least a 4th and 5th bill, probably a 6th bill as well. There were some tax provisions that were included in this bill that passed last night that will, by the way, it has to be passed by the House of Representatives. That's going to happen tomorrow. It will be signed by the president. That will probably happen on Friday or Saturday. So the bill won't be law for a couple more days, but we don't anticipate any changes to it at this point. So there's starting to be a lot of summaries, and I know LeagueApps is working on some stuff. But there's some small tax provisions that are included in this bill that could also be helpful for net carryback loss and some of the other tax provisions to encourage you to make investments that you might have held off on otherwise. There will be some increased tax incentive to make those investments. But bills 4, 5, 6 will probably do a couple things. One, they'll probably try and address some of the gaps that we see, whether it's in the systems to deliver this funds and the oversight of those funds, or just seeing that there are some, there's some sectors that might not recover very quickly at all, or anticipating that this could go on for quite a while, and the funds that have been appropriated are not enough. So you could see an upping of all of these different loan facilities and liquidity facilities over the next few weeks. So we're watching out for all of that.
So Izzy, I think one thing I'll say to everyone here, and this is important, is I think there are going to be some more opportunities to make sure that we get this right. One thing that I'm personally committed to with the team at LeagueApps, and I'm really mobilizing the sports industry, is to make sure our voice is heard, try to influence those things. So if that's something you're interested in, I'll talk at the end about how through our Slack channel or LinkedIn or emailing me personally at jeremy@leagueapps.com. Would love to figure out ways to get people involved and more importantly, solve loopholes. I'm going to go to some questions because they're flowing in, a tremendous amount of activity, and I'll try to make these kinds of punchy questions. So Paul, the first question I'm going to ask to you, one of the situations is most people's business structure here is to have lots of independent contractors, right? And so when you have independent contractors, how does that work in terms of your options? Are there options related to the way you might handle the fact you don't have money to pay them, and your approach to that? And Izzy, the follow-up question to you would be, is this bill impact independent contractors as well? And I'm not sure if you can comment on that, or that will be part of the follow-up. So Paul, independent contractors is a structure most people in this world have. What advice would you give them if that's the situation where most of their cost basis is?
Thanks, Jeremy. Well, first, I think everyone needs to examine whether the individuals that they have currently engaged as independent contractors are properly engaged under the applicable state law. There's a lot of misconception out there about proper classification of independent contractor versus employee, part-time employee. For example, in Massachusetts has one of the strictest independent contractor statutes. The law is basically every worker, and that's the collective term, worker, is presumed to be an employee unless they meet a very narrow set of qualifications that allow them to be an independent contractor, which basically means they are independent. They do what they want. They can do it for other organizations, and they are free from direction and control. You can't tell them when to work, how to work. It's entirely independent. So first, I think if we examined everybody's independent contract classification, there might be some reclassifications as what should properly be part-time employees, if not full-time. But that being said, if they're the individuals are legitimate independent contractors, there would usually be some type of a contract, a written contract. You need to examine that contract in terms of what are the termination provisions, whether you can just cut off or immediately terminate, whether there are notice provisions, the payment upon termination. So that would be governed by the independent agreements.
I got you. Okay. I think one of the other questions is, if you have an independent contractor, if they were laid off, are they eligible for unemployment?
I think so in some cases. Do you know, Izzy?
Okay. Yeah, Izzy, please.
That's a great question, Jeremy. So two things of note. First of all, the bill that passed last night does include independent contractors among the individuals who can access both unemployment insurance and SBA funds. So if you have a business that has independent contractors as opposed to full-time employees, you can still access those funds. If you are an independent contractor and are out of work, you've lost all your clients, whatever it is, you can access unemployment insurance as if you were a full-time employee. The other thing that's important, and this actually just happened a minute ago, New York State court just ruled that Postmates workers are eligible for unemployment insurance. So Postmates, some of you might know, is a large kind of deliver at home platform, like an Instacart or kind of similar to Lyft and Uber and stuff. And so I think you're going to see kind of you won't see a reclassification, but you will see an inclusion of independent contractors, 1099s, as part of the part of the community that can get access to funds.
Great. So this is an important point. The bill as written should be inclusive of the structures that a lot of youth and adult sports organizations have in terms of the 1099s. If you've laid off or 1099s are being laid off, they also will be eligible for unemployment benefits and have access to that based on some of the things that are happening. And again, if there are gaps in that, please let me know those gaps. I'll come back to this at the end of the session, because I think we're eager to work with Izzy and others to advocate to make sure that those loopholes are addressed. Last question the last question I want to pose to you, Izzy, is am I right that if they've already taken actions, is it retroactive? Some people are asking questions like, does it go back that if you made these decisions a couple of weeks ago or by up to February 15th, can you still get the benefit of bringing them back and getting eligible for some of these grant funds?
So part of that's going to be in the kind of laying out of the regulations by the SBA. My guess is that they're going to err on the side of being as generous as they can be within the law.
Great.
Obviously, if you're a business owner who laid off 20 people on February 14th in anticipation of not being able to meet your payroll, and then you realize that, oh, you know, a month and a half later, there's assistance, I'd like to bring those people back onto my payroll. My guess is that they're not going to want to penalize companies who are trying to do the right thing, bring people on board. I think, quite frankly, for some businesses, they might realize that the unemployment insurance could be more generous than the salaries or the fees that they were paying. So I think you just, you know, for everybody, you're going to have to be your own best advocate, whether it's for your business or for you individually, to figure out what the best path is going to be. But I do think that, again, they're going to try and put these rules in place as quickly as possible.
Right. Perfect.
When it comes to SBA loans, also remember that they're not necessarily coming directly from the SBA.
Right. You're going to be working through.
They're running through the financial institutions that are SBA lenders, and for the most part.
Right. So, Paul, real quick, rapid fire question. A lot of people have non-competes with their employees that have brought in their organizations. If someone is furloughed, is that non-compete valid? If someone is laid off, what might be a way to make sure that they protect that non-compete?
Again, governed by state law, state to state, but I think generally a non-compete is going to be in most states enforceable regardless of the reason for termination, although in some states it's limited to a termination for cause, which a layoff would not be. So we'd have to check specifically in the particular situation.
Right, but you do have the option too of offering a severance agreement, saying, hey, I'll pay you a couple weeks severance, but I need you to sign a release agreement that maintains a non-compete. So that would be another option organizations would have if they're concerned about that.
Yes, would be an option, and in some cases there's garden leave required for a non-compete to be enforceable, so you'd want to do that anyway.
Okay, great. Sarah, Mitch, and I know Jennifer can weigh in too. A lot of questions coming in about refunds and credits and how you're dealing with this stuff. So, Sarah, how did you guys approach questions of refunds? And this question of, do you have refunds? Do you give credits? What was the way that you handled this?
Yeah, we talked about that really immediately because our business is very seasonal as well. And we had over $1 million that we had collected for our spring season as deferred revenue that we need to hold on to. So how are we going to approach that in addition to the winter season being cut short due to all of this? So as I was saying before, in terms of a rapidly shifting model, and everything seems to be distance learning, and that's really taking over across the nation. And what we did is really in under 10 days switch to that digital suite of offerings. And what we're doing to be able to retain the current customer and not give refunds is we've been able to create a virtual class so that the class can continue uninterrupted with the same coach, just virtually, and be able to really focus on making that a high quality experience that people can understand. So you can do it in a 5x5 space in your living room. You can use household items. We're teaching kids how to make a ball with a shirt, how to make a goal out of a cardboard box, all of these things to really be able to communicate to the consumer so that we're able to replace the physical class with a virtual class for as long as that can go. And it has been really well received. So what we're doing on the virtual side is actually we work with clubs and schools directly as well. So those schools and those clubs are so excited that they can offer this. So we're partnering with them, giving them a revenue share, so that these clubs can have us as a tool to be able to retain their revenue and also generate new revenue potentially. So, if they're ever, and any clubs out there who are interested to talk more and figure out how we can generate revenue or use our platform as a tool to retain current revenue and not give refunds, that's really what we've been focusing on and kind of redirecting the consumer.
Awesome. So no refunds, you're shifting them into the virtual environment, using that as a way of continue to say you're offering value. And as you mentioned, you're doing what we're going to, I think in a couple of weeks, coming back to a lot of digital innovation, likely talk about some of the efforts that you're doing there. They can find you on the industry Slack group to talk more about whether or not some of your virtual training that you've created could be a resource as a rev share to organizations who may not have the ability to create it as quickly as you all have done. Mitch, how did you handle refunds and this question of refunds and credits? How did you navigate that?
So again, similar, we had people prepay for the spring season, which hadn't occurred yet. So we put the season on delay, both classes and our huge spring basketball league and our AAU type programs. So right now they're on delay, and our goal was to just communicate with parents that we're taking it week by week. We'll see when executive orders in the state of New Jersey are lifted, when maximum capacity rules are changed, and we had already allowed at least a month of give and take time at the end of the season to sort of always expand, because March sometimes had snow, so we always wanted to leave some dates available to push our league back. So our goal was to communicate to parents that even if it's a condensed kind of program, we do 2 sessions a week instead of 1. We do 2 games a week instead of 1. We can maybe run this league from May through June or middle of May through the end of June and still give most of the customers what they paid for. We do have a policy that we have on our LeagueApps platform that says that refunds are given freely for doctors' notes. And we've had a couple people who've had kids have asthma and say that no matter when we get back, they don't feel comfortable having their children play, and we right away would refund those kind of people, because that's a medical condition which we totally upfront said to them that we would give a refund for. And so right now everyone's sort of working with us, but you have to understand that people do pay a lot of things by credit cards, and they could ask for chargebacks, and you're gonna have to deal with that aspect. So you have to have a policy in writing in place somewhere in case you get a barrage of chargeback requests from credit card payments. And think about that. If you've already set one up, you may have to deal with that on the end of communication with the credit card companies.
Yeah. And so we'll talk about the dispute stuff in a second. So Jennifer, one of the ways, obviously, you have organizations that are navigating refunds. A lot of it comes down to communications. If they're excited about the idea of sports fee insurance, that had to be bought at the beginning of the season, right? It's if the season hasn't started yet, it's not gonna. There's no way to access it now.
Correct. I mean, for this particular situation, the insurance would have already need to be purchased. You can't buy insurance and then make a claim with the intent of that. Right now is the time to prepare for the next season, anticipating, like, this is a great example of we never know when the unexpected is going to happen. So it's important to be prepared, and having a refund policy in place like this alleviates the clubs from having to deal with that, worry about it, increase prices, build that into their budget. This is something that they can either include as a whole, or they can pass that off to the parent and let the parents decide if they want to purchase it.
Yeah, and if people are interested in this, feel free to reach out to our LeagueApps team, and we're happy to connect you to Jennifer. Jennifer's also part of our Slack group, so you can reach her. Maybe we'll create a channel called Insurance, so you can just jump in there and fire away your questions at her to be able to talk about this. But it is something that parents are electing to buy on an individual basis, though I've seen some clubs bundle this into their fees. So it's something that protects every company. They don't even give people the choice. And so that way, at least on an individual family basis, you're going to be more protected, not necessarily as a club, given what's going on, but anybody who's laid off, for example, they would have the insurance can take over those club dues as an example. Paul, one last question on refunds and credits. What happens with an organization where parents want their money back, or there's a refund policy, but they actually don't have any cash to pay it back? What's the legal perspective here? Obviously, given your business litigation stuff, or what advice would you get for how they navigate that question?
Difficult situation. I mean, technically, literally, it's going to be a breach of the contract if the funds can't be refunded. But if they're unable to do it, my only advice would be to try to work with parents and get at least some type of forbearance, as you would with some are doing with leases and banks, and you can do it with your customers as well, and see if we can get some agreement to an extension of time or payment over time. I mean, ultimately, they could force the issue by small claim suits or such. Nobody, I think, really wants to do that, and it's a matter of trying to capitalize on great customer relations to see if you can work out some flexibility.
Yeah, one thing I'll interject here is that, and there's a blog that just went up on our website for a LeagueApps learning session we did yesterday for our partners that talked about revenue strategies in this environment, and some of which has tips related to this. Next week, we're going to be releasing as of tomorrow, a toolkit around some templates around best practices for parent communication. Because if you're already at the stage where they're calling you for a refund or they're disputing, or even worse, you're already behind. So to Mitch's point earlier, how are you proactive around how you're communicating this? How are you using this to build relationships? How are you telling the story of the coaches and the people in your organization that are impacted by this? Because, I've seen this with the people that I have relationships with. Once I understand if I pull my money, what that impact is, it makes me think a lot differently about it, unless I have a specific circumstance where I really need to. So that proactivity, I think, is really important. Sarah, one last question for you is, I think a lot of your programs are more session-based. So there's a lot of folks out there that have done individual training out here. One of the appealing parts of the Super Soccer Stars model is when parents want to sign up, they can sign up for a whole series of classes. But am I right that they can sign up for individual sessions? So as you get started, even if you can only run 4 or 5 classes, they can sign up for individual classes as another way of generating revenue, as opposed to kind of a one-off training environment.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, flexibility is paramount, especially in these times. So we're creating a lot of that within our models. So you can do one private class for yourself and your friends. You can do one single one-on-one training with a coach. You can sign up on Mondays at 3 o'clock for a whole 12-week session that can actually continue for the entire year. We have a lot of different menu of options. We have live stream. We have, we're working with our friends at Famer to create an app that we've created an app so that it's 450 videos, a 14-week curriculum that you can do at home whenever you want. We're recording our sessions so you can do it at any time. So we're diversifying our menu of options and making it as accessible so people can try it once or they can sign up for a longer period of time.
Yeah. So let me step back for a second and try to summarize, I think, some key points and takeaways from this session as we run up on the hour and talk about the resources to kind of continue this conversation. So the first is, one is you're in a situation, you got to manage your expenses. So how are you going back to all of your vendors, and what are the conversations you're having with them? How are you reviewing those contracts to figure out what kind of agreements or forbearance that you can get around what you might owe, right? That's one strategy. Mitch talked about that and how you examine that. And in Memo Maybe some of the assistants will even help you be able to do that, like rent. The second is you got your employees and you got to navigate that because that may be your biggest expense. So there are different strategies that you have available to you. You might choose to lay people off, but do it in a way that lets them take advantage of better unemployment insurance. You can do that in the right way to talk about hiring them back, providing a lot of support to them. You could decide to furlough them if healthcare benefits is really important to them and maintaining a relationship with them. You could decide that you want to convert them to part-time and that they might be eligible for a blend of unemployment insurance and your own support, depending on how your state programs might work. So there's different strategies. You can also do a pay cut across the organization as well. So there's strategies by which you can navigate those kinds of expenses. There's a question of your credits and refunds, which is the money you've already collected, which you really don't want to give back because it's so critical in these lean times. And that comes back to proactive communications. It's thinking ahead with programs like insurance. And it's also thinking about what are the ways that you're creating virtual alternatives to drive people into. What are the ways that you're able to drive people into other kinds of kind of a delayed program, or using this as a credit for future kinds of programs, or letting people buy a gift certificate that you can apply to the future. A lot of strategies that you can find on our website that we'll, again, be releasing more content on. And then last but not least, as you navigate those things, how do you take advantage of all the government programs that are out there? And there are so many questions coming in about this. And the key question is how do I understand more about this? And this is where I want to say is we got you. At LeagueApps and what we're doing at NextUp is really about circulating and bringing those resources to bear. This is still a fluid situation. Izzy was involved in these conversations. It's still processing all the information in the bill that will pass and be signed into law, as he anticipates by Saturday. So our goal is to summarize that, provide information to everybody, and let them take advantage of it. There's a few things that I'll ask you all to do if you're out there listening to try to help us take advantage of this. The first is we've got the NextUp industry group for the youth and local sports industry is on Slack. Jamie has posted something on the chat channel. It'll be a link in the follow-up email that you'll get later today. If you sign up for that, and if you don't know how to use Slack, it's one of those great things to learn how to do now, because it's a free tool you can use for your organizations. But I'm eager for us to figure out how we can continue the conversation online. And I'll commit that all the questions you've asked that we couldn't get to, we'll follow up with these experts to get their answers to share within that Slack channel. And people like Sarah or Mitch or Jennifer are already engaged in that community. Izzy and Paul, you're welcome to hang out there as well. So that's the first thing. Slack and LinkedIn, use that as a place to continue the conversation. The second thing is that we'll share at the end of this a link to a survey that we've been sending out. Let us know the issues and topics that matter most to you. We'll continue to figure out the best way to deliver those kinds of resources. So if you haven't filled out that survey, please do that. And last, whether it's Slack, whether it's LinkedIn, whether it's hitting me up on those platforms or on my email at jeremy@leagueapps.com, I'm very eager for us to both translate what Washington is doing to help everybody here, but more importantly, help lead and create a voice of this industry to make sure that we advocate for the needs of youth and local sports, because it's so critical to development of character and what these kids are doing. And I think there's a critical opportunity for us to raise our voices. So that's something we'll be announcing more on that. But if you're interested in being involved, go ahead and let us know that. We'll have 2 events next week. So you can go to events.leagueapps.com. You can see it's all about leadership during crisis, how to communicate with your parents during this time, and some very fun speakers we're going to announce about how to lead your organizations right now, in addition to the ability to learn from each other. So a lot of resources that are available. We're out there, we're supporting you, and we'll get through this together. Again, remember, you're surviving to thrive, and with the expertise that our panelists have shared, the expertise you have amongst each other, you all the new authority within youth sports and local sports, and we're committed to supporting you. So with that, I want to thank you for joining us. Please check out Slack and LinkedIn, check out our website to access those informations, and look out for more resources on how to take advantage of what's happening in Washington to impact your organization, as well as other ways we can support you as well. With that, this is Jeremy Goldberg signing off from some random location in New Jersey. Have a great day, and be well, be safe, and looking forward to seeing you, many of you next week at our events. Take care, everyone.
Thanks.
Thank you.